Alright, well, first of all, I just want to say thanks to everyone for waiting. I know this was the most eagerly awaited panel for today. Louder? Alright. So I know for some people this is going to be a therapy session, for some others it's going to be an education opportunity, and for others it's just entertainment. So whichever bucket you're in, I hope this meets your needs today. So my name is Mohan, Kompella. I'll talk about myself in a second, but let me introduce this amazing panel. A lot of intellectual horsepower and accomplishments per capita on the stage here. We'll start with Archana. Archana Sekhar, she leads the business operations function at LinkedIn, where she's responsible for strategy and performance management of key operational metrics across the company. She was previously with McKinsey & Company as a management consultant, got her MBA from Stanford GSB, and a dual degree in CS from IIT Madras. She's also an avid karaoke singer and a TV show host. Thank you, Archana.
Nice to meet all of you.
Yeah, I'm going to go somewhat fast here, so if I skip something or if you want me to pause, please let me know. Mohan Garde from Germany. Not Godavari, please don't. BTech in Mechanical from IIT Madras, MS from Cornell, an MBA in Marketing and Finance from Wharton. Started as an engineer for GE, and then post-MBA, he worked at Intel, Nortel, Kodak, Sonoco, and HP. He started in marketing product management, and over time had VP and general manager roles. He lived in San Diego, the Bay Area, and also 10 years in Singapore. He discovered his passion for real estate over the years, and after retirement, obtained a real estate broker license, and he now enjoys working part-time at Berkshire Hathaway in the Bay Area. Mohan, welcome. Then we have Vijay Sundaram, also not from Goa, but from Narmada. Vijay Sundaram leads strategy and operations at Zoho, driving multiple functional areas from corporate strategy and execution to channel management, BD or business development and enterprise sales. He is a prior entrepreneur and company founder in cloud supply chain software, mobile ad tech or advertising technology and renewable energy. After graduating from IIT Madras, he studied CS from the Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences at NYU, and later got a business degree from Wharton. On weekends, you may see him on his motorbike in the Santa Cruz Mountains. That's very cool, Vijay. Welcome. And then we have Yogesh, who I'm sure you guys have all heard of people doing IIT MBA, JD MBA, etc. So Yogesh also has a distinction of an MBA MBA, as in 2 MBA degrees. So talk about that. Too many things. Yogesh is a seasoned tech investment banker with 25 years of experience and adverse clients in the enterprise software and system sector on diverse capital raising, which is equity and debt, private placements, pre-IPO financing, etc., and strategic alternatives such as M&A advisory, recaps, and all. Currently, he works at Credit Suisse, and prior to that, he was the head of software investment banking, the head of software at BMO Capital Markets, and Union Square Advisors. I want to skip some of this stuff. We'll come to that. But he has a bachelor's from IIT, a master's of engineering from the National University of Singapore, and an MBA from NYU Stern. He's also a CFA charter holder. He has lived in over 25 countries across 3 continents, which gives him a unique perspective into people, culture, values, and how technology affects all of us. So, welcome everyone. And very quickly, my own background. After spending 4 years at Godavari and IIT Madras, I got getting my BTech somehow. I moved to the US, and among other things, I was an extra in a Hollywood movie, which the movie flopped, so I decided to get an MBA from Kellogg, and I now run a hands-on marketing advisory company for Seed A and Series A and Series B companies. So with that, let's kick it off. Unfortunately, my questions are on a different device, so spend a second switching. Alright, before we get started, just quick audience show of hands. Like, how many people here have an MBA? About a third, I guess. And the others are either actively considering it or probably thinking about it. Hope so. Alright, so let's pivot to the panel here. And let's actually start, Archana, with you. Just to kick things off, can you tell us why did you choose to get an MBA? and what did you major in?
My choice to get an MBA was actually very early in my career. Although I got my engineering degree, I must admit I was never a practicing engineer, which is quite blasphemy to admit in this room. Because I joined management consulting right after graduating from IIT. And so my reason to get an MBA was what I loved about engineering when I entered was analytical thinking. And by the time I finished getting my degree, the monotony of writing code just brought me down. I did my internships and I realized this is not what I wanted to be doing. But I found that the world of business could help me deploy that analytical thinking in concert with decisions that can be much more fast-paced and have a clear direct impact. And that's why I joined management consulting, and the rest of the path kind of wrote itself from there.
Okay, great.
I think my journey was a little bit exactly the opposite. So I left IIT and joined a business program, and then decided I didn't know what these guys were talking about, and maybe even had the arrogance to think that they did not. But so I decided to switch to a computer science program, and did that, worked as an engineer for many years, and then decided to go back and get a business degree, mostly to cover things that I thought I didn't know. I was running into company, and there was some sort of magic around what finance was or marketing was or things like that, and I felt I didn't know that, so I need to go back to school. So in a sense, I went back not for the usual reason that people do, which is career advancement, but more to fill in the gaps. So that's my journey. I got the degree in finance.
Yeah, so just my story here, just some context here. So I grew up middle class in Mumbai. Actually had just finished my A-levels, which is 12th standard. Had a lot of options in front of me. Could do medical, I could have gone into architecture. Actually, I was already there ranked 32nd in the architecture, Roorkee College of Architecture, which was kind of fascinating to me. Had the medical choice open. But most importantly, I actually also played badminton. And when I grew up in Mumbai, which is Vikhroli, the closest campus that I would go to play was actually IIT College. So my decisioning on me going to IIT actually was determined by my access to a badminton court. And I decided to kind of go to IIT and realized very quickly that I was always very fascinated by the business side of the house. Used to subscribe to Business World and Business Weekly magazines, and though I think I came from a technical background, I think I realized that my strengths were, I think, a little bit slightly outside of being technical. I would say that I'm a good engineer, but I'm not a great engineer. Long story short, post IIT, I actually got a scholarship to go, pursue a PhD, which I thought was fascinating in itself. So I went to Singapore, this was during the .com time. And within a year of my master's by research, I kind of got involved in a startup and took a slightly different path again, where I said, okay, I'm going to maybe do a startup and not finish my PhD. So did that and kind of got it out of the business side of the house. 2 years into and we kind of raised on a 5-page business plan, like $10 million, really good VCs. And 3 years into the startup, we had a banker who kind of helped the sale of the business. And that's when I said to myself, maybe I should be on the other side of the table. So, when I talked to a few people who were in Singapore at the time, they basically suggested to me that, look, for you to make a career change into what you do, to where you want to be, I think the best path for you to do is to go to an MBA. So that was basically my journey to come to the US for business school. So I went to NYU Stern. And after my first year or first 6 months of the business school, as people who've done MBAs know, you kind of have to walk into an internship. And basically that's what happened to me. I got an internship at JP Morgan, and then ended up joining JP Morgan full time after my business school. So I think, again, it was kind of a path that I stumbled onto, but that was basically my way of changing my career into what I wanted to do.
My path, I went to business school in the 80s. I was in the class of 85, MBA from Wharton. At that time, you know, if you look at corporate America, most of the traditional industry, a lot of the leadership did have MBA degrees, and it was seen as the more classic paths to advancement. And GE was run by Reginald Jones, the legendary CEO, until Jack Welch took over. And so I thought, well, this sounds really good. And that was one reason. The second reason was that I lived here in the Silicon Valley. My job at GE was in San Jose in the nuclear energy business, and a very mechanical engineering job as I was trained in thermal analysis. And all my friends were in the new tech. They were in the semiconductor, telecom, computing hardware and software. And I said, gosh, what am I missing? So I really wanted to pivot from the traditional mechanical engineering industry to more of the new technologies. And now both my kids are in tech, and they tell me, Dad, what you did was later on was not tech. And I worked for Intel, I worked for Nortel, and Hewlett Packard Company for a very long time. But well, I guess there are cooler companies these days to work for.
That's interesting, Mohan. So I'm actually going to scramble the order of the questions a little bit because of what you just said, which is you said, you know, in the 80s when you got an MBA, you said the MBA was the path to career advancement, right? And I think especially all of us being in the Bay Area and hearing people like Elon Musk talk about how, you know, he would not hire MBAs, which makes me think and makes, I'm sure, many of us think, like today, what is the value of getting an MBA in 2023, right? What is the value of getting an MBA? Like, if you maybe to connect it to your own paths, if you go back in time, would you do it again?
Yeah, maybe I can start with just give my perspective. I think I would do it again. And I think the reason I say that is, you know, I mean, I think the way here in the US, the way it works is, you typically go to an MBA after a few years, after spending time in the industry, right? So again, depending on kind of what your perspective is with respect to where you want to be, my view is that if you really want to be in the general management or get some formal education in management, I think it's a good idea to get an MBA. But you got to stage it, right? I mean, I think you've got to see in terms of where you are and where you want to be. I think the skill sets that you get when you do a 2-year MBA program, I think it's less about kind of the formal classroom education. I think a lot of this is to do with, I think, networking and meeting people outside your core, you know, I would say the places that you can network or get to know people. Because I remember like my 2 years of MBA, I think the most fascinating thing was actually meeting a lot of my classmates who came from different countries, different backgrounds, different cultural, you know, different kind of sectors as well. So I think that is the big value of doing an MBA. But again, I mean, I'm talking from my perspective, which was 25 years back.
Okay. Vijay, what do you think? You were pretty opinionated about this, I think.
I've talked from the context. I've been in technology for a lot of my career, but not always. So from a context of technology, I would say no. I would say it's not that relevant. And I would argue this on two directions. Take the organizational view and take the individual. So if you take the organizational view in technology, I think it's useful to think of maybe... Oh, sorry. I'm sorry if you could hear. Okay, could you hear so far? Yeah. So if you take the organizational view, it's large. I would look at what is the purpose of a company itself, right? It's you know, people will talk about all kinds of moral nuances of shareholders and stakeholders and stuff, but it really comes down to relevance to your customers. And in technology, relevance is largely established by the sweep or the arc of history. And that happens through rapid innovation, through the ability to to actually disrupt yourself, you know. So things like that is exactly what is not taught in business school. And so from an organizational perspective, I don't think that these kinds of organizations will benefit a lot from MBAs in that arc of history. Maybe to run the operations well, yes. From an individual perspective, the story might change. A person might look at it as a way to advance themselves. Again, in technology, that's not necessarily true. Look at the Look at the innovators and the CEOs that most people admire. None of them are engineers. So, but from an individual perspective, it might make sense because companies demand it. And people like me, or I don't, but people like me might want to hire people like me. So that's why it makes sense. But otherwise, I don't really see a whole lot of rationale.
So Achal, would you agree with that or not? Because you said something interesting around structured problem solving, etc., which the audience members might remember is something that Venki, I forget his last name, but he talked about that too. How, for him, engineering and problem solving are all connected related. It's a lot of structured problem solving, right? And I think you said something similar.
Yeah, I think the individual stories look very, very different, as you said. From my personal experience, right, the CEO of our company did not finish undergrad, but the chief product officer and the chief operating officer both had MBAs. So there are examples of both kinds in the company. I do agree with you, the MBA breeds a certain kind of risk aversion because you tend to overanalyze the problem, whereas what you need in terms of a vision and a gut feel to truly innovate gets dampened by all of these frameworks that the MBA teaches. So which is fair. A role like mine, I work in a tech company, but I lead the operations function. That's actually a very useful way to plug in into technology, but I'm not the person who's going to be coming up with the next big idea. It just depends on what you think your strengths are.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think a lot of B-school, including your case studies, etc., before you make a decision, it's about doing a systematic, objective analysis of the pros and the cons and the risks and the payoffs, and then making a measured decision. But that is not how I think a lot of entrepreneurs, for example, operate. Yeah. So which then brings up the question that actually, Mohan, do you have anything to add?
I would say it really depends on if I were reliving my life today. If I were in a traditional industry, I would still consider it. But if I were more in the CS, PE space, probably the entrepreneurial angle would have been more interesting, and maybe a PhD would have been more interesting than doing an MBA. But for what I did, if I had to live my life over, what I learned in the MBA was a few things. It gave me analytical frameworks we learned in IIT. It's very good at problem solving. It gave you a better set of tools to analyze the problems more broadly. What I got out of it is teamwork and communication. IIT people are not always the greatest at working in teams, but the business school training, the case studies, the projects, forced you to interact with very different people from the IIT people. People who had no engineering degrees, may have accounting, may have a liberal arts degree, and they all come up with great ideas and creative ideas. So you learn that to defend your logic and your case, the point that you were making, a lot of it. How do you defend and that works in the workplace. Right? It's not about just having a great idea. Can you have the passion? Can you defend it? Can you get people to line up behind you? Can you get your team to buy into your idea? You have the vision that people gravitate around. Can you communicate it in a few simple messages, not a one-page article or document which people have trouble, they lose their interest after the first paragraph. So that's what I got out of it. Could you have done without it? Yeah, you could have done without it. You could have learned all these things somewhere else.
Yeah. Great point, yeah. So which actually brings me to my next question. So earlier with the audience we saw, I think a third said they have MBAs. The other 2/3, I'm assuming don't or may not get one. So given what you just said, what the panel said, like how would, especially over time, assuming that people want to climb the ranks, etc., like what is the best non-MBA path to acquiring those management skills, the ability to do structured analysis and communication? I'm sure each of you has worked with other leaders who are probably super successful but don't have an MBA. So what have you seen them, how have you seen them learn and grow and be successful? Any nuggets, any wisdom?
Shall I take that? I think the avenue for learning outside of an MBA is not just go and learn the same way that you're taught in business school. A lot of your learning is experiential on the job, right? Think of being an effective marketer. Where are you going to really get those skills? So on the job is one part, that's pretty obvious. I think people who really learn outside the MBA are people who study trends in industry. Why did the Japanese dominate in the 80s and not anymore? Right? How did Korea emerge? There are a lot of these lessons, and it comes from reading, it comes from studying this, and you actually don't get these things in an MBA. You know, you have to observe these things. You get the ideas of how to run an operation, and a beautiful point being here, how to work with teams that all of us could use, right? So you get that. But if you want to understand business in the large, you have to read in the large, and you have to read at that length. And I think that's how I've seen that from our CEO. His understanding of business is very deep because it combines philosophy, it combines business, it looks at studying countries and why they've been competitive. And I think that's the kind of stuff you don't necessarily get in a degree.
So I think, I'm going to paraphrase you a little bit, but I think what you're saying is, if you have the mindset of someone who studies business, who's actually learning from the real world, etc.,
Yeah.
then an MBA could be an accelerant. But in the absence of that mindset where you're actually not actively learning from the real world, you're saying the MBA is not that useful, or am I paraphrasing too much?
No, I'm just saying that MBA teaches you specific skills. If you want to understand business in the sense of the historical sense of business, then you have to do that learning yourself. You have to go read people. I'll tell you, I'll suggest a book here. There's an author, his name is Joe, I'm forgetting his last name. It's called How Asia Works. This guy is not an economist. I think he has a much better understanding of the economics of Asia than any of the economists who have written on this stuff. That's reading, right? So you discover people like this, you understand and pull ideas from them, you actually apply it in your business. That's what I'm talking about.
I mean, just to add to that, right, I would say, I think MBA is a great platform for folks who want to do a career change, right? For people like me who didn't come to the US to do masters. I mean, I came here to go to business school, and I was here for a particular reason because I wanted to get into finance, right? So I would say for people who want to do that change and want the ecosystem where you can swim through the ecosystem into the system, because you go to Stern, you go to Wharton, you go to Howard, like everyone's got programs to either get into consulting or investment banking. So I think that's basically a way or a place that an MBA can help you. But I think to Vijay's point, I would say you don't really need an MBA to be successful, right? I mean, one of the fascinating things for me, for what I do, is spending a lot of my time with founders and CEOs and entrepreneurs, especially on the tech side. And I tell you, 95% of the folks don't have an MBA, right? They don't have a formal degree in business, but they are great business leaders. So I think to be successful in business, you don't really need an MBA. But I think if you want to navigate your career in a particular fashion, then you've got to think about whether that can be addictive to you or not. I think that's the way.
Interesting. Okay. So I guess maybe we've been talking about this indirectly, but let me maybe make it more direct, which is, is an MBA more valuable in certain industries or verticals? Is it less valuable in others? Right? So maybe Yogesh, let's start with you, right? This finance.
Yeah, so just to maybe put a final point on what I just said, which is an MBA is helpful if you want to make a career in finance, especially if you're an engineer or from a non-traditional background. I think I see obviously from IIT, folks who come here for either work, and I think things have changed over the last 15, 20 years, right? I mean, I joined an MBA program before the financial crisis. Investment banking was a very different business back then. If I were to tell you stories with respect to what I had to do in my first semester after I came here, not really knowing how the US system works, not really knowing how people culturally think, we were given very specific guidance from our seniors or mentors who were at my school with respect to what and how do you need to think and talk if you want to get into investment banking, right? It was very competitive. I think it's very competitive even today. So for a sector or for a vertical like finance, I think absolutely an MBA is helpful. And maybe another anecdote I will share. So when I was in Singapore, I knew that I wanted to do something in finance, right? I was going through a startup and someone told me that, hey, maybe you should do a CFA, right? Get your CFA degree because that's going to help you to get into finance. So I gave my 3 years of CFA, and I think people who know the CFA charter, you have to get you through your 3 years of exams, and then you also need like 3 years of work experience to be able to get the charter. And for getting the charter, I basically had to do something in finance. So I talked to a few people. People suggested that maybe I should do equity research because that's what you do, like stock picking, and you kind of write on sectors. I grew up where information wasn't like as freely available. Like we didn't have, obviously a lot of web searches and things back then. So I relied on kind of what people told me with respect to what I need to do to get there. And I remember in my first month, the first 2 months at NYU, we went through kind of a program where we were, we were actually aligned with a senior or a mentor, a senior sponsor, I would say. And their job was to basically sit down with us and kind of help us understand and go through a discovery process of what you want to be and what are the options available for you. And I remember sitting down with my senior, and we went through an hour-long exercise where he said, okay, he took a piece of paper and he said, okay, tell me what are the things what are the things that you want to do? And I said, okay, he said, okay, tell me what are the things you're good at? And we went through a couple of these items. And then he said, okay, now let me chalk out for you what are the different jobs in finance, because I think you want to do something in finance. But let me tell you what are the different jobs in finance, right? So when I came to the US, I didn't even know that you could do research, you could do investment banking, you could do, FX trading, you could be a sales guy. Right? There are like multiple jobs in finance that you can do, and each, I think I would say, profession requires a slightly different mindset. It requires a slightly different training. So even within finance, if you're risk averse, yeah, you can be in the risk management function, right? If you're a high risk, you can be a trader. If you're slightly less risk averse, you can be a banker. So I think the objective of that was basically, as I went through my mapping of what I was good at and what I wanted to do, the advice that I got from my senior was, look, no way you're going to do equity research. I don't think that's good for you. What I think you should do is, you're good at connecting the dots, you're good at meeting people, you're good at relationships, so I think you should consider doing investment banking. So I would say again, an anecdote in terms of like how I think in a profession like finance, I think an MBA can really help you, because it kind of helps you break some ice, especially for people like us in the background.
Fair.
Yeah, I'd like to add a point. I think what's really important to answer that question is to understand your motivation for doing an MBA. And if I look at the people that I've come across in school, they typically came from 3 or 4 flavors. Some were the career enhancers. They worked for the big companies, they were company sponsored, they were from the big industrial houses, including India, who were going to be anointed heads anyway, they just needed the formal education and some skills to do that. Then there were the people who were trying to pivot. Either they were trying to switch industries where this lends itself to make an easy switch, or not easy, but a switch from one industry that's declining to another, where your domain knowledge would have been an impediment in moving from one industry to the other, because an employer would say, but you know only this, whereas you're capable of a lot more. And then there were people who were trying to switch function. I hate my accounting, but I'm stuck in an accounting job. Or I hate my civil engineering and I want to do something else. And then there were the people who were finding the meaning in life. They had liberal arts degrees, they had jobs in retailing, never really had a really professional job or a large income. And for them it was a life-changing event. And then there were a bunch of people who didn't really know why they came there, just because somebody told them so. And they were the most disappointed in the end. And I would say, overlaying that, what's really important is, what it helps you if you go to a top-tier school is it opens doors. And that you have to think of the problem in 2 parts. Can you do the job that you aspire to get, and can you get it? Because the world is competitive. You might be capable of doing the job, but only someone who knows you will take a chance at you. But if you have the degree, it gives you a little bit more credibility, and it opens the door to getting the job, which while you're perfectly capable, but may lose out in the competition.
Yeah, no, the last point just personally with me resonates a lot, because I was stuck in this really, pardon my French, really shitty company on the East Coast, stuck in green card hell, and I was in a technical role. I knew that I wanted to get into marketing and product marketing, but I couldn't. the only way I could do that was to get the best MBA degree I could get, and which worked successfully. So and I think you almost, I don't know if that was your intention, Mohan, but I think you almost laid out like a motivation roadmap, right? Not a roadmap, but a map.
Yeah.
Motivation map for people as to answer the question, if they want to get an MBA, why should they get an MBA? What are the 3 or 4 reasons, right? So I want to ask the other panelists, like anything to add to that in terms of motivations and
one thought I have connecting both of your questions, the last 2 questions actually, is you want to pick something in your career where there is clearly an intersection of what you want to accomplish, what you're good at, and what is valued in that industry. And what I've noticed is, if your motivation is about getting ahead in your career, you want to go with an MBA into an industry where interdisciplinary thinking actually gets you ahead. Because that's what I think the MBA really helped me understand, right? Whether it is about empathy and human psychology and incentives and organizational behavior, it could be economics. These are the types of things which a formal degree that is deep in engineering or deep in medicine is not going to get you. And if you think that industry that you're in can benefit from this kind of interdisciplinary thinking and has at its helm people who can bring large teams like this together, then it's worth getting an MBA to get into that industry. If your personal motivation actually is a lot more about, I want to be an expert in a field and not quite a generalist, you're way better off just sticking in your field and being an expert there.
Cool. So, picking up on that, and I think from what I saw in the bio, it sounds like all of you got like full-time MBAs. But I'm assuming that you know a fair number of people who've got other forms of it, like evening, weekend, executive MBAs, etc. So, I guess the question I had was, and Mohan, you kind of alluded to this as well, which is, are all MBAs the same? You know, are all MBAs the same? Are all schools the same? You know, what are some considerations that someone considering this degree, should really be thinking of? Especially because, there's the cost of the MBA, and especially with certain types of degrees, there's also the opportunity cost of not working for a year and a half, or 2 years. Right? So it's not an easy decision, also a very expensive decision. So what's the right way to think about it? Any thoughts you have to share?
Sure, I can add a couple of thoughts. All of the different ways that are available have a place, and it depends on your personal situation. So if you own your company, you need to manage more business aspects of it. You could get that knowledge from an online course or reading a book. That's you keep doing your job, augment some skills. You could do a part-time course for some people. One of the challenges people have run into with that is they do their job and whatever they're doing, and then they get their degree, and the next day they declare, I now have an MBA, and their boss says, but what's changed? You're doing the same job all these days, and they want you to do the same job tomorrow. And sometimes they have to just change their job to another company who will see them in a different light. And then there's the executive MBA, which is also an option for people who have many more years of experience. I worked only 2.5 years as an engineer. So it was one of the earliest, I was one of the younger ones in the MBA class. But the more experience you have, maybe an executive MBA where you have other responsibilities, may actually be a better choice for you. And for some, no MBA is also a good choice. Right?
EMBA and no MBA.
Now, I was going to say, I think the most important thing is, I think it's important to go to a good school, right? And I think it's important to go to a good school for 2 things. One is to get access to good faculty, right? So if you want to say, for example, for NYU Stern, Ashwat Damodaran is world famous for his courses on valuation. I think it was really a pleasure to be in his classroom to get the basics of that embedded in us. So it's important to go to a good school with good faculty. And I think secondly, for folks who want to do a career change, I think it's important to go to a school where there is a good office of campus development, what they call an OCD, or career development. Because for career changers, I think as Mohan said, I think it's important to have, I think you want to know where you want to be. Right? So I think that would be the second thing to just consider from a school perspective.
Okay.
quick comment, I agree with everything here. The risk of sounding elitist, I would say that going to a top school does get you ahead. It's a lot of it is a network, a lot of it is resources. So I personally and candidly would not have done it unless that was the case. So that might not apply to others, but that's a personal decision.
I agree. The signaling value is very different based on the school that you're in. If what you're looking to is to learn, then there are many ways to do it, less expensive ways to do it than getting an MBA.
Great. So I think we're it's getting slightly later in the day, so maybe there's one or two other things we'll do quickly, and then
Mohan,
yeah.
could we get to audience questions? Is that okay, you guys?
That's good.
Okay. Before we get to that, I want to share a piece of information that the organizing committee, why and how they came up with this particular topic. Because this is something that we know. Out of the 5 of us in the committee, there were 3 MBAs already. So for them, they probably had an opinion. The other 2 were a little above the age mark, probably to think of pursuing an MBA. So we had to think outside the box and say who in the audience might be interested. And we said, okay, there's probably people who have at most worked 10 or 15 years after a bachelor's degree who might consider it. So they will get help by this kind of advice and experience. But the older people will probably have nephews and nieces or cousins, kids or whatever, who might be wrestling with this particular topic, right? So we said, okay, maybe we will be able to spread across, and then coming up with a topic like that. Just imagine we had some animated conversations. Should we have this title or not? All in good spirit. So, that said, right, I just want to say, I really want to thank these people and then open it up for questions. I will start with a question. I've not asked a question all day, so I will, if you don't mind, ask. What I wanted to do, I stepped in and out, so I may not have caught some parts of it. My question is, to each of you, do you have one person, or maybe 2 if you're really struggling, who does not have an MBA, but you really like their management style, right? I mean, senior, could be senior, mid-level exec, whatever, right? There are things, and then you say, I wish they taught this style in MBA school, in business school. Just curious, a quick name is all I'm looking for. You don't even have to get into much more detail on why and how. So that's my question to each of you panelists.
Okay, I can start with that. Early in my career, I worked for a woman who was very senior in the company. Somehow I happened to work directly for her. She never had an MBA. She had an astoundingly good communication skills. She was a top-notch engineer in the company, but had astoundingly good communication skills and people skills. I probably learned more from her than from anybody else who's had an MBA.
I'd say Ryan Rosnansky, the CEO of LinkedIn, doesn't have an MBA. What makes him a remarkable leader is his ability to observe human behavior and infer patterns from it. Because that's what he does as a product designer every day, and he understands how members use the product.
I think it's going to be tough for me to pinpoint one particular person. But I think in my profession, I do meet a lot of founders and CEOs of companies that either in public or have gone through an M&A process with, and most of them don't have an MBA. And I can tell you, like, some of the leaders that I meet are just fantastic. They just know the pulse of their employees. They have a very good pulse with the customers. They're really good at operationalizing kind of also their vision and roadmap in terms of conducting business. And I think all of those things are all the MBA courses combined together, but deployed in, adapted in a very practical fashion.
Yeah, most of the time my bosses had MBA degrees in the places I worked, but I did work for the head of the imaging and printing group at HP. It was the biggest moneymaker, who was from an Indian gentleman called Yogesh Joshi. He was my direct boss for a while, and he was amazing in how he connected with the people, especially the engineering folks. He would spend time in the labs wandering around and hear them out and connect with them. He had a very good pulse, and he was amazing at motivating the people to do their best. So that's something which you can call it whatever, beyond the scope of formal education. Maybe you learn it on the job, but obviously you learned it somewhere along the way, and that's something I wish they emphasize more through opportunities, including in IIT.
If I can add a quick comment, my example was also from your empire. So maybe there's something about the company culture.
Yeah, I just want to add something to Archana said, which is I found like the best leaders, including, for example, the CEO of my most recent company. Sorry, I found that the best leaders, the savviest leaders without MBA are those who are excellent students of human nature, who understand people, who understand motivation, and who are able to then apply it to whatever field they're in. And there's some phenomenal people out there, I think, who have done it successfully. And for people like that, I actually think that if they were to get an MBA, I'm biased, it's definitely the 1 + 1 = 5 type of equation. So.
Hi, my name is Pratishtha. I graduated from IIT Madras from Department of Management Studies. So I got my MBA from IIT Madras for a change, like a lot of people here. My question is, while MBA did give me a lot of conceptual learning, learning about frameworks and historically how management has been carried forward. But what I felt was, does it really make you employable? Was a big question mark after I completed. In terms of when you go to a company, they don't really look at marketing skills. And I can actually identify your target segment, but how can you actually do it in terms of tools, technology? I think that's something that I felt was a question. So the question to the panel is, how important is digital proficiency along with MBA to be able to get employable in the current market?
At least for the folks that I've hired over the last 20 years, I would say what I look for in the hiring process is the problem-solving abilities and the structured thinking. Everyone gets a course in SQL as soon as they join my team, but those are learnable skills. So I don't think it is a prerequisite for you to come join the team.
So the only thing is, for example, digital marketing, right? You learn everything in your books and everything, but unless you actually get your hands-on experience on the tool, how are you going to do it anyway, right? So my specialization was in marketing, but I did not know how to use Google Ads. I did not know how to use Google Analytics. I did not know how to use Google Trends. I did not know how to use SEO or SEM. I had to learn all of that by myself, doing courses.
Yeah, I can actually speak to that. So, after I got my MBA from Kellogg in marketing and strategy, I was, very confident and started to run marketing for a Series A startup. So within the first week, the CEO said, "Hey, we have this PR agency I've been using. I want you to manage them." I said, "Sure." And I was completely clueless as to how to manage a PR agency. I had no idea what PR success metrics meant. I could talk all day about segmentation and targeting and positioning. Right? Zero idea how to manage a PR agency. Zero idea how to use Google Analytics. Zero idea how to do SEO or SEM or anything like that. So I do think that, I don't know on the finance side, for example, how applicable it is, but definitely on the marketing side, it doesn't, my opinion, there is a gap between acquiring employable skills versus what you learn as part of your curriculum.
I would add in an MBA you learn lots of things, right? And I picked finance because I knew I'd have the hardest time learning that on the job. Because I'm not going to go and learn how to do, and so I went way more than I needed to do to get a finance degree. Because I figured I would learn marketing and strategy and other things on a job. I already had done some of that before. So you're totally right. I think the schools don't teach the right things. They don't teach the things that you need. If you say you come in with a degree in marketing, people expect you to do certain things. There's a fundamental disconnect in the school to recognize that that's what employees expect out of a marketing specialist. So I agree with you.
I wonder if that is specific to an MBA though. I think that actually is about all education. Even if I came out of engineering, I'm sure whatever company we joined has a different coding platform and you're going to spend the first 6 months wrapping up anyway, right? So I think that's cool in general.
After I finished my MBA, 6 months I had to actually spend time on LinkedIn, Coursera, Google certifications to actually learn the real skills.
Yeah, I think it's at two levels, right? One is knowing how to do it and then the specific tools. But these days, you do a lot of projects in class and so on, and you should be learning maybe not the very specific tools you would use. But it's the same in every education program. If you go back to our IIT education, you probably use 10% or 15% of what we learned in the first job, right? The trick is you didn't know what your first job was going to be and which 10% you are going to use, right? But it comes back later on. Even in later roles as the head of Asia, I used a lot of my mechanical engineering knowledge because the responsibility included a lot of manufacturing plants and so on. But I never realized 25 years, 30 years later, it would be still there and I would actually use it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Matthew Parton, BTech 2004, IIT Madras. Matthew Parton, BTech 2004, IIT Madras. This panel is extremely relevant to me because I don't fall into the category of someone who has completed an MBA or who's thinking of one, because I'm right in the middle of one. I'm 1 year into the program at ours, and I'm kind of in a sort of a dilemma. I finished 1 year, I'm thoroughly enjoying the program, meeting a lot of great people, and I'm looking at a pivot. I've been in the mechanical field for the past 15 years, and here our school has a focus on entrepreneurship. So I'm looking into getting into that field, exploring ideas, talking to people, to know which would be something worth pursuing. And from where you are, when you look at a person who has an MBA degree, or who's in the middle of one, and you see that he's trying to move into an entrepreneurship area, what is the first thought that you get? Because an MBA is, like you said, either you go the traditional path where it's about career progression within an industry, within a company. But here you have somebody who's getting entrepreneurship with an MBA. And now I need to know what the pulse is. What is the take on that kind of a journey?
What is it that you want to do? Are you looking to be an entrepreneur post an MBA, or do you want to
I'm looking to make money.
That's fantastic. Look, I think I'll give you my perspective, right? So, you're in the middle of your MBA, and entrepreneurship can be, I think, a lot of things, right? I mean, you can be an entrepreneur. My profession is an entrepreneur as well, because I'm responsible for my P&L, I'm responsible for my driving my business. So you can take the concepts of entrepreneurship in different directions. I would say a lot of jobs on the buy side is also about understanding how entrepreneurs are and who they are and how they are. So you can actually stretch it in the way that you want it. So I would say, I think what you need to do over the next year or in the middle of this right now is really discover what is it that's going to get you to what you want to be, right? I mean, I don't think you should connect the dots between like I'm in an MBA and being an entrepreneur post an MBA is either something that is contrary to each other, or it's kind of, it's ironical. I mean, I don't know if that's what you meant by asking the question, but I think you've got this, I think this is the time where you kind of really discover what you want to do post your MBA. And, go at it. I think utilize all the resources that you can find from the school that you're at, and, do as much networking, meet as many people as you can. I think it's a great time to kind of reset and kind of leave things behind and just look at where you want to be.
I would offer just a couple of suggestions for you. Once you finish your MBA, you can either go into an adjacent space where you can leverage some of your knowledge, so whether it's mechanical related or whichever industry you came from. But you need to overlay this. Now you've got these tools that you learned and skill set in your MBA, but what you probably can be successful in many fields. You take your pick, but you need to have passion for what you do. So you have to love what you do, and you should really feel passionately about it. And you shouldn't be able to you should not take no for an answer, because there'll be a lot of naysayers, regardless of what you do. To me, all those things are more important than, just analyzing too much about exactly, there are 36 choices I have, and which box of this should I focus on? Because you need some domain knowledge, you need some skills, you have to have passion, and then of course you can't forget you have to work hard.
I think an India is not a natural place to go and be an entrepreneur. Because for many reasons, I think was touched upon earlier, the risk averseness. When you get out of there, first of all, you sunk a lot of money and you want to make it back. And you follow the crowd. All of us follow the crowd. We're all from IIT after all. So we follow the crowd. So that's what you tend to do coming out from MBA. And I did it a long time before you did. But today, I think there are many more people who form these kind of informal networks. I know somebody right now who's going through business school who is spending this summer, just like you in the middle of business school, who's spending this summer doing entrepreneurial activities and hooking up with a bunch of people who are trying to do that in business school. That didn't exist when I went to school. So maybe there is some redemption yet for an MBA in entrepreneurship, but you have to work at it.
Okay, looks like we're out of questions. Thank you all. Vigorous discussion for a week.
I know that we were quite a bit behind schedule, but this panel is, I really want to thank you guys for the kind of information that you were willing to share, because that was the other doubt we had in our mind, Are you really going to say, is it a sellout or a step up? That was a question. But thank you for your good advice. I think definitely people who asked the questions here or were thinking of asking the questions benefited from it. So, I'd like to